What does that look like? A big filled in thing. That would be, in my mind, a corpus luteum or even possibly a corpus albicans. Can't really tell. It's not going to be. It's not. Corpus luteum means yellow body. What does corpus albicans mean? White body. That's a degenerated corpus luteum. But that's what the corpus luteum kind of look is. After a mature follicle ruptures, it turns in, under the influence of luteinizing hormone, it turns into a corpus luteum that secretes progesterone. That's like the ultimate example of a Graafian follicle. Antrum filled with follicular fluid. That is the actual oocyte. And again, for our purposes, we could either say one of two choices for that, primary or secondary, depending on how close. It doesn't finish meiosis 1 until right at ovulation. So what actually gets ovulated again is the secondary oocyte, but if you don't actually see it expelled, you don't really know. What about these guys in the periphery? Primary, or again, possibly primordial follicles with, you know, they're still primary oocytes at that point. Female actually begins meiosis before they're born. We'll talk about that in the lecture. But it just kind of gets put on a dormant stage. And I know in here there's a pretty good secondary follicle, and that's one right there. That's a pretty good example of a fairly late stage secondary follicle. You know, maybe a cycle or two, it keeps getting stimulated by FSH and LH, turns into a Graafian follicle. What about that loose stuff right in the center there? What part of the ovary with this big?
Medulla.
That's the medulla. You can see it's a much less dense connective tissue, whereas if you make your way out to the periphery, tell a pretty big difference. Much more dense. That would be the ovarian cortex out in the periphery.
What was, like, if you go back up out of that middle of one of those other white spaces? Like the big,
Be, I don't know exactly. Could be blood vessels possibly. That one there looks like a blood vessel right there. That looks like a blood vessel. Could just kind of be the way that it's processing the slide in the blood. That's actually the mesovarium up there, but we didn't really dwell on that. So we won't at this point. And lastly, this one's a real easy one. What does this look like? Out of curiosity. Yeah. Fat.
yeah.
Fat cells. But you go underneath those fat cells, what are we looking at here? Thyroid gland. Jack it up 1 degree here. This is a pretty good one right here. What is this right here? This whole thing is a thyroid follicle. These would be, what kind of cell is that? Follicular cell. Thyroid follicle, a follicular cell. What hormones do follicular cells secrete? T3 and T4. Thyroid hormones. What's in the center of this thyroid follicle? Thyroglobulin, or you can call it thyroid colloid. And that's going to be all the ingredients necessary to make T3 and T4. So the amino acid tyrosine, iodine, or whatever other junk you need to make T3 and T4. Okay, if you go kind of in between, and the thyroid follicles, you can see like right there pretty clearly just a single cell layer. What are these cells going to be in between thyroid follicles? C cells. C cells, she cells by the seashores. And what do C cells make? Calcitonin, the other thyroid hormone that deals with calcium metabolism. So you have C cells, and kind of like analogous really to the what in the male, seminiferous tubules, kind of like the Leydig cells in between seminiferous tubules, you've got C cells that make the hormone calcitonin. That's it. All right, well, there's a whole bunch of these up here. If at some point you want to have a up close and personal look, and we'll just